All right, next I wanted to share with you just some basic terminology that you'll see kind of time and time again. This is definitely not an exhaustive list. This is sort of just some of the main things that were on top of my mind that I think, particularly from a fundamentals perspective, are going to serve you well. The first one is distance management, and that really refers to the distance I have with an opponent or a training partner. And as a general rule of thumb, I want to be all the way in or all the way out. And so if we're talking self-defense, I probably want to be all the way out if I can be. I want to use my legs. I want to run away from a situation rather than have to stand and fight, right? But in a more visually easy to understand sort of scenario, being all the way out means being beyond your distance that you can hit me, that you can strike me, right? Being all the way in means like I'm starting to get into what we would refer to as a clinch, where I can smother the power that you would have on your punches, right? You can't get the effective leverage to deliver, powerful shots that would hurt me, right? So as a general rule of thumb, all the way in or all the way out. But distance management is something that you will see sort of time and time again. And so that middle zone between I'm beyond your reach and I'm all the way in and I'm smothering sort of your ability to move in the way that you want to, that middle ground is where things are dangerous, both in the form of being able to be hit by a striking opponent if we're talking self-defense, or I'm in danger from attacks and submissions if we're talking, the game that is jujitsu and grappling with somebody else, right? The next sort of concept that I would share is base. You'll hear a lot about having a good base. And if you think about base, you can sort of think of it as like a foundation, right? It's the idea that it's your platform, your body is stable. And so if I'm standing and my feet are close together, my base is not going to be very strong. I'm going to be easy to tip over. If my feet are sort of staggered, a little wider than maybe shoulder width apart, and now somebody tries to push or knock me over, particularly if they're doing it sort of straight on rather than at an angle, I'm going to have good solid base. I'm going to be able to absorb and hold my ground, most of the time, right? So think of that as sort of like a stable platform that you're working from. It's also, it's kind of a side note here, but when you think about a triangle, the base of the triangle sit flat on the ground. That ends up being a very strong structure, which also happens to be part of the logo that you see with many of the Gracie family, businesses, right? And that is actually meant to represent having a strong base or strong foundation. A couple other things that you'll hear oftentimes interchangeably is the idea of a post, right? Post and frame. And so you'll hear those terms used interchangeably a lot of times, but they're similar, but they're not the same. So you can think of a post on a deck, right? If this thing is straight up and down and the weight is pushing down on this, that is a very strong structure, right? If it is at an angle and I start to push it down, it's not a strong structure, right? And that's why when you build a deck or you build some sort of a physical structure, those posts are set in such a way that they are resisting some sort of an outward force, right? And so the same concept is true in jiu-jitsu. So a post is going to be something that is outstretched, right? Like I can use a leg, and if somebody was trying to take me down, I can post it out to the side, which is then going to resist me being pushed in this direction in this case. If I was trying to manage the distance, to use the term we just talked about, and you're closing the distance on me, I can extend my arm with a post that is going to keep you away from me, right? If I'm trying to get up off the ground, I might post behind me to help myself get up, or if you're trying to push me down, I might use a post behind me with my arm to stop that from happening, right? So those are a few examples. A frame, on the other hand, is you can think of it as like a collapsed post. So at the point that this is starting to become compromised, I bend it, right? And so now my elbow becomes a frame. So it is still a physical structure, a bone structure that I'm trying to use rather than just muscle and force to keep you at bay. But the difference is fully extended versus sort of collapsed, right? So in principle, they are used very similarly, but they are, slightly different. But posts and frames, is where I'm really trying to use my bone structure rather than strength to sort of hold space until I'm able to make my next move. The next thing is a hook, right? And so you can think of a hook, oftentimes like we have grips on a uniform, right? So I'm grabbing. Well, a hook is another form of a grip. And so rather than grabbing a uniform, a hook is going to be like me reaching up underneath an arm or behind a head and then pulling you towards me. Those are the easy sort of visual examples. You can also use your feet as hooks, right? And so if I can hook my foot up underneath somebody's leg, I can use that to pull them towards me as well. And so between posts and frames and off balancing and hooks, I can create opposing forces on a training partner or an opponent that help to off balance them, right? And so hooks end up being one of those forms of control and manipulating somebody's base and balance to my advantage, right? Another thing that you'll hear is what's called inside position. And so to be able to control somebody, as a general rule, you have to control inside position. So, you can use that to your advantage in a couple of ways, right? If I want to control you, I want to have inside position. And you can think of inside position generally between like sort of the armpit and the hip, right? And so if I can control this position, I can control your torso and I can limit your ability to move. And so another form of inside position, which can be a bit confusing, is if I can control the head as well, because that's sort of inside, like under my jawline or my ear and my shoulder. So the inside position would be here in that case, right? But I can control your posture. So if I want to control somebody, I want to have inside position. If I want to prevent them from being able to control me, I want to deny them inside position, which then leads to sort of the next, concept or, terminology that I want to share. And you'll see this a lot of times, but it's this idea of knee and elbow connection. And we'll talk about that in some individual techniques as well. But if I have my knees close to my chest, I'm denying all of this space between the arm and the hip, right? Whereas if I get extended out, I'm giving you much easier access to this area where you can begin to control me, right? And so, again, if I want to control somebody, I want to own that space. If I want to stop them from being able to control me, I want to close up that space and use my posts and frames and hooks and these other concepts to deny them access to that area, which is going to allow them to control me. So again, this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but I think it's a helpful start so that, when you hear these types of things in class, you have at least a general understanding for what we're trying to accomplish with using a post or a frame or a hook or denying inside position or dealing with distance management, things of that nature, right? Whereas if you didn't understand this terminology, you could sort of miss the key points of a particular technique. So wanted to just share this as a helpful backdrop so that when you see these things sort of pop up in training, they seem less foreign and they'll come up over and over again. And as always, ask questions. Don't be afraid to feel silly or anything like that, because that's how you learn. But hopefully this video gives you a good jump start on that.